Welcome back to part one of the Our Social Contracts podcast brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Arizona. My name is GraceMarie and I'm your host for today's episode. Today we're going to be continuing our conversation on the Declaration of Independence, exploring its meaning and looking for its modern applications. 250 years ago, the Declaration of Independence did more than announce freedom. It declared a social contract. It said the government exists only with the consent of the governed, that the government has a duty to secure the rights and representation of the people. Those principles, liberty, justice, accountability, become the foundation for the Constitution. And just over a decade later, those principles, freedom of speech and press, the right to assemble, freedom of religion, due process, and equal protection, were written into the Bill of Rights. The Declaration of Independence voiced the grievances. The Bill of Rights set down the remedies. Together, they defined what we the people expect from our government. The colonists were demanding a government that served the people, not the other way around. And today, those concerns remain urgent. Joining me for today's conversation are several fabulous fellow college students in Arizona, Mikah, Ari, and Emra, and a special community member panelist, Jenna Lynn. The grievances in the Declaration of Independence can feel like a long catalog of complaints, but they really weren't random at all. We've talked about how they revealed a pattern of power used to control, to silence, and to weaken the people. For our discussion today, we're going to focus on the category of military oppression and the colonists' adamant rejection of the use of military power over the people. To start the conversation off, let's begin by listening to the listed grievances, numbers 11, 12, 14, 15, and 25, read for us by Emra.
Grievance 11. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Grievance 12. He has been affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Grievance 14. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. Grievance 15. For protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. Grievance 25. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and unworthy the head of a civilized nation.
So panelists, with that, let's jump into our discussion questions. The first question we have for consideration today is that the colonists objected strongly to the presence of standing armies during peacetime without their approval. Why did this strike them as such a dangerous violation of liberty, and how did it connect to their own ideas of self-governance and consent?
Yeah, so I think for the colonists, kind of in that perspective, the standing army was the most visible sign that the king didn't respect them. And so I think that really demonstrated to them that if you were planning to rule through force rather than consent, and I think that's the most important part, is that when we look at the Declaration, it says kind of without the consent of our legislatures, and so pointing to kind of a fundamental breach in that social construct or social contract. And, I think we see that in such a broader sense today, time and time again, where their people are feeling disrespected by the government because they don't feel that their voices are being heard. And so whether it's like students at a university level, or whether we're seeing kind of ICE taking over a lot of our communities throughout Arizona and throughout the country, people are not being respected by the government and those in power because they're not able to consent to what's happening, and they feel that their voice really means nothing. So
Yeah, it's all very frustrating. It feels very paralyzing.
Yeah, and it's especially true when you're talking about like state sovereignty, and you've got the National Guard crossing over into different states, and the commander of the National Guard is actually the governor, and so with the governor saying no, we're good, like we don't need our, there's no crisis here, and like manufacturing a crisis to create chaos is just like not what the military is supposed to be used for.
100%. I think also this whole standing armies thing, I was thinking about this a couple days ago because, forgive me, but I go to 4 different grocery stores to get groceries because each grocery store has something different that I want. So I'm going around in Tucson to all these different grocery stores, and every single grocery store I'm at has 2 cop cars at least parked outside. the grocery stores. Like, they're inside the grocery store, they're parked outside, they're sitting in their car while they're walking in and out. And it's like, for heaven's sakes, like, is this all really necessary? Like, it's a grocery store, and this isn't a particularly dangerous neighborhood or a bad area of town. And I mean, even if that was the case, it's still not even necessary. But it just like, it really feels puzzling to me. And it's like, why is there so much surveillance from police everywhere you go? It's ridiculous.
Well, I also think we've built such a culture around fearing people in the military and people in the police force that we're so afraid of them that seeing them, we don't feel like more safe and more like protected. We feel afraid. Even if you aren't doing anything, you feel afraid when you see police officers for the most part. Like I do. I feel afraid whenever I see a police officer. I don't feel more protected by seeing those police officers at the grocery store. I feel more afraid.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I also think that the military and the police are sometimes used as like chess pieces to intimidate and do whatever the commander, the governor, the president want to establish. And I think that they're really ruling by that fear, like Ari said, and it's really problematic to the citizens who just want to feel safe and feel like they have freedom and liberty to move around. But unfortunately, that can be inhibited a lot.
Yeah. And I feel like they're getting around a lot of that right now by like having them wear the same uniforms. So it is really confusing. And as somebody who's been in the military and knowing that veterans don't support this, like nobody signed up to police their own neighborhoods. Like we didn't sign up for that. A lot of people are from these neighborhoods, especially in the Guard, because like, you know, you're within your home state and you're living there, and nobody wants to like go to their church and help ICE. Like, you know, nobody wants to do that. And so it's kind of a nightmare. And even, you know, when I see when I see people, it's I'm like, oh, what are they doing here? And I didn't feel like that before, you know, or if I ever wore my uniform in public, people would be very generous and happy. And we've come a long, long way from that, actually, since like after the Vietnam War. You know, there was like a lot of those soldiers and military members received a lot of grief for like the war, even though it wasn't their fault. They got drafted. And so we've come a long, long way from that. And so for everybody to be confused, like I've even seen like mainstream media, like pictures, and it says like, you know, ICE, but there's actually like National Guard there. And it's just, it's confusing on purpose. And it's been, you know, getting worse and worse since like after the Iraq War. Like it's just like really, the police force has been militarized a lot.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is such a huge problem is now that we have kind of ICE coming into communities. And like you said, it's getting confusing between kind of looking at all the different things, as it loses that accountability for them and loses the legitimacy of, you know, the police who are actually maybe responding to a situation, because then, you know, now you just have general fear in the community of, you know, these institutions because of the mismanagement and the corruption and of what's happening, you know, from the federal administration. So
no, that's absolutely. And I have an example of that. So a few months ago, when all this ICE stuff was starting to ramp up, I work in a healthcare center, and, you know, we just keep our doors locked because we work in an underserved neighborhood, you know, just to keep our staff safe. But we had somebody came to my office and was like, "Oh, Jen, there's like an officer here," and I was like, "Well, from who?" You know, and I'm comfortable with dealing with law enforcement, and actually usually have a pretty good rapport because, you know, they're helping us, and we like want to be safe. Like we want people we don't want like crime around our cities, but we don't. What happened was, we had like a legitimate operation and the U.S. Marshals were there, but I didn't know that it was legitimate. I thought it was ICE. And they were being so rude, and they were acting very icy, you know, they were acting very, very much like that. And it was like a really kind of scary thing. He threatened to handcuff me.
Oh my goodness.
Like, you know, and I'm there in like heels and like, you know, I work with like older people, and I'm like, what are you doing here? And, you know, they wouldn't, and normally they're very transparent. And they had a real operation to do. And so it's kind of dangerous and unhelpful for them too. You know, it really is. Yeah.
I also think that's why a lot of people are scared to even call the police in situations, because there's not that like trust anymore. I think it's been really hindered by these institutions and people in power.
Yeah. And to your point, Jenilyn, I think there's just an overgeneralization in general. Like you see again someone in a uniform and you feel afraid. And like you mentioned, it really impacts the actual prevention of bad things being stopped, because people are so afraid that they then intervene, and then the bad things that are happening actually continue to perpetuate. So it's an all around kind of a butterfly effect into a worse situation for everybody. We'll move into our next question here. Does the colonist vision of this relationship hold up today? For example, when we discuss the relationship between military and civilian institutions, how does this grievance continue to reflect law enforcement today?
Yeah, I think we just kind of got into that, right?
Yeah.
Like just confusing the public, because the trust between, I mean, that's like a bedrock of our like country, right? Like there's a trust between the military and, the civilian, not just the civilian law enforcement, but civilians in general. And so we joined the military and swore an oath to protect, the Constitution.
Right.
And, we disregard unlawful orders. We question them. We don't do that. And we don't join to police our own country. Like that's not it. Specifically in the Guard, I joined to, help my community.
Yeah.
And get to respond to natural disasters.
Right.
And, do stuff like that. So, and the Guard does a lot more, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this question is especially relevant to Grievance 12, where we talk about he has been affected to render the military independent of and superior to civil power, where now we have situations where you have law enforcement, very ambiguous on purpose, coming in to enact these operations, legal and illegal, and civilians aren't aware of the civil power that they hold. And I know we have people from all over Arizona on this panel, but in Tucson especially, we have an ICE hotline that you can call to get help. And the League passes out copies of the Constitution in English and Spanish, and I think every person should have one of those. And even having, like, in my apartment, we have like the constitutional rights on the backside of our door, because a couple of my roommates are immigrants, and it's one of those things where it's like, if that were to happen, like, you need to know your rights, you need to know what you can and cannot say, and you need to know the power that you have, because you do have power in these situations.
Yeah. God, it makes me so sad you guys have to live like that.
Yeah.
It just shouldn't be like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to so much about, both what the colonists were like experiencing and what we're experiencing today is exactly what you guys talked about, that when military institutions kind of are rising above the civilian authority, it's just like the eroding of democracy. And I think that's really what we're seeing. And I, like, as many of you have mentioned, but I feel like I hear young people all the time say, like, we don't feel protected, we feel managed, kind of by a lot of these like institutions.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of tending to what the colonists were mentioning and kind of what they were talking about. But that we have to just return to this idea and keep reminding people that all of these institutions at the end of the day have to return to being accountable to the public and to the people, and not insulated from it. And that's how, I think we have to frame it to some people who might think, all of this is just because like we like crime or like we
right.
like whatever this is. But that truly, like, if we allow these institutions to just kind of take over, then the health of, like, we need to have a healthy democracy, and going down this path is kind of to that detriment. So
when I see the relationship between military and civilian institutions, I think about what it should be. It should be like, especially like the National Guard, people who are still within their home state, it should be uplifting the community and uplifting these civilian institutions, not what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, definitely. Jenilyn, I have a question for you, just kind of as we're discussing this. I'm thinking in my head about, and it's okay if you don't know the answer, but with your connections and your involvement in the military, I wonder if you're aware of any places where folks who are interested, who have maybe military background, can get involved and connect with other people who are in the military who feel similarly, that, these things that are going on are not right. And in those communities, what has the response been from what you know?
I love this. So I'm not going to lie, I was spiraling like January, February.
I feel
I
like
was
a lot of us were.
big time. And I got invited to a demonstration for deported veterans. And so it was hosted by Common Defense. And I was like, oh my gosh, where have these people been?
Yeah.
Like this, And since I've been involved, I've, helped support, efforts for the VA.
Yeah.
I've gone to DC twice this year.
Yay.
And it's been really great to be with people who are service minded, a lot of diversity, like just really supporting civil rights and a lot of just like the basics too.
Yeah.
And actually there are a lot of people who've come from like both sides of the aisle, but we all stand for the same thing, which has been really cool. It's like all the best parts of the military without all the BS. Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear that, because I think like throughout this podcast we have and continue to kind of go through these very relevant issues in our society. And when you look at some of the facts are depressing. And it's really easy to lose hope. So I always try to like tie in a little piece of like, there's still hope out there. Like there are still people everywhere who are trying to figure out the good in these situations. And so I just wanted to shed a little bit of light on that. So thank you for that perspective. I think we'll move into our third question here. For the colonists, being forced to house soldiers blurred the line between public service and private sacrifice. How did this grievance embody the deeper fear of losing control over home, property, and personal freedom?
Yeah, this is probably my favorite question, just because I think it's so crazy that this used to happen 250 years ago. That, like, in the colonies, these soldiers that were from the King's Guard, right, from a different country, were just allowed to come into people's homes and were allowed a bed and food, and, like, you had to service them. Like, they were complete strangers. Like, you never know who would come into your home. And, like, the home is such a sacred place for people. Like, it's so personal, private, and to just like open that up to the government and to the military without any reason in like a time of peace was just so crazy. And I think that it ultimately shows that just how much the king was blurring that boundary and line between public and private, right? Surveillance versus security. And ultimately, like, once the government enters that, private sphere, it's very scary. And I think that, people are like, oh, well, what does the Third Amendment do? Like, it really, safeguards our liberties and our private sphere.
Yeah, that's true. And so when somebody's in your home too, like if you're a parent and you have children, or, like you said, you don't know who's in your home, or I was reading that like, a lot of times these daughters would enter consensual relationships with the soldiers, and now you're in a relationship with the redcoats, and oh man, it just sounded really complicated. And it sounds like a lot of that stuff did happen. And so just no thank you.
Yeah.
No thank you.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think it really speaks to just how much like the colonists were in fear of their autonomy going away. And I think that's what a lot of people would say is happening now from a multitude of different facets. But I think that's the prime thing we see now is like the massive surveillance state that we live under, whether it's from corporations that like have a tremendous access to like every single piece of data that exists on a person, or whether there's something happening in the city of Tempe right now where they have these kind of fake cactuses that are just full of cameras and they're around the community, and so just like these things that are just very strange and odd, and I mean pretty much everywhere you go now, you go into a store or even parks, whatever it might be, I mean there are pretty much cameras every single place we go. And so I think it's really interesting, and I feel like this is going to be the next like coming into conversation in a lot of different places, is like what is the balance between that. We've even seen since probably the late 2000s like the rise of like the Ring camera, and I think there's like definite benefits in that, but you walk down your neighborhood street and you probably on 15 different people's videos, so it's just an interesting thing that's kind of increasingly happening. So
yeah, I just read an article in the Arizona Daily Star about the use of license plate technology as a tracking mechanism for people all across the state. And they're using this technology for immigration raids and to track people who have quote unquote suspicious travel activity. Like that's very clear and defined. Thank you. Right. It's scary, and it's one of those situations where, again, we know that people are being racially profiled. And this technology, even though they say like, oh, we're using this for good, it's for your own safety, that's not what we're seeing in application. What we're seeing in application is racial profiling and illegal operations. And that's part of what I feel like is so frustrating. And then also a part of what gets flipped back onto the people who are actually just trying to do their jobs. Because people see all of this stuff in the news and they're like, I can't stand law enforcement, all of this other stuff, which is valid. And it is an extremely frustrating experience dealing with it today. And I think, so again, that gets flipped onto law enforcement agents who are trying to do their actual job. And it, again, just ends up being a bad butterfly effect for everybody.
I also think that it's crazy because, I mean, nobody ever consented to being on camera or being, like, tracked like that. And it's like, oh, just because it's the government, it's okay because we're keeping you safe. So, like, you have to give up your rights to be safe. But, like, what does that safety entail? Like, what does it actually do to benefit the community? Like, we don't really see those end results, you know?
Yeah, definitely. We'll move into our last question here. Taken together, these grievances reveal a profound distrust of military and power unchecked by civilian consent. What lessons can we carry forward today about preventing military or security priorities from overshadowing the civil liberties and rights that define a healthy democracy?
So I think one way is enforcing laws that we already have, right? So posse comitatus is the law that says, like, you know, basically we shouldn't have troops in our streets.
Yeah.
Right. Like, full stop. And, you know, we shouldn't be using them to police people. It just creates this, like, legal and ethical, like tsunami. And it just really undermines our democracy. And so right now there's some legislation on the table. And so earlier this week I was in at the Capitol. And so we were lobbying for a couple of laws that are on the table right now.
Nice.
And so one is from Senator Tammy Duckworth. And so it's called the Military and Law Enforcement Accountability Act. And so one of the things it does is it enhances oversight and really, like, draws clear lines between, you know, military, civilian, law enforcement. And for any act that's longer than 30 days or for orders or using defense assets for more than 30 days, they're going to require congressional approval.
Nice.
Which would be great.
Yeah.
And also intended to use for, like, real emergencies, like not fake emergencies. So
Right.
like public health emergencies, attacks on infrastructure,
Yeah.
terrorist incidents, like real emergencies, right? And, you know, keeping people from being in dual hat roles. So especially in the Guard, you can be like in the National Guard and you can be a police officer. And so it's wanting to prevent people from being able to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. And then also in this bill is strengthening requirements for self-identification.
Nice.
So no masks,
Yeah.
ID tags or identifiers. So that's one. And then there was another bill we were supporting, the National Guard Proper Use Act. And so that's just like drawing a finer line for the Posse Comitatus Act, prohibition of troops' involvement in civilian law enforcement, and clarifying that troops can't transport ICE agents, can't transport immigrants, can't do any of that stuff. So I'm really hoping those come through. And so it looks good for sponsorship.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that people get on board.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for doing the work on that. That's very valuable and it is deeply appreciated by all of us here. I want to touch a little bit on two of the things you said. The first thing is the masks that they use when they go. I think in connection to this question, I think one of the lessons that we've learned a lot about like security priorities especially is identification. When you're coming to these people's homes and you're saying like, oh, I'm here to do something that I'm supposed to, but I'm not going to tell you who I am. I'm not going to tell you who I'm with. I'm in unmarked vehicles and I'm wearing unmarked clothing. That is super suspicious and it makes people feel really unsafe.
Yeah, and it should, because, you know, there have been attacks on women in particular, right? And people pretending to be ICE agents and they're not, and like sexually assaulting women. It's just very scary.
Yeah, and then to connect that, what you just said, to one of the grievances here, we have the grievance for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So obviously that is not the same as murder, but I think it's very prevalent in the military community, and the repercussions, as I understand, are not the same as they would be in like common society.
No, and so there's some of that going on right now, right, with the boat killings in Venezuela, right? The extrajudicial, there's drug traffickers and we're just gonna blow up boats.
Yeah,
like, they killed like 80 people, and as far as we know, and that's just not okay. And from what I understand, they were the people on those in those groups were signing NDAs, and like that's not normal, super hella not normal, not normal. And there's like a lot of pushback from the military. I'm reading today, like especially with the not following unlawful orders, all of that. People are really questioning it now, and actually I heard there's a group protesting in front of Davis Monthan because there's a big command force there that's like supporting that. So from what I understand,
very suspicious stuff. Very suspicious stuff.
And I feel like all that kind of just shows that this drift towards kind of accepting military power and force is like the default tool for governance. And like especially what we're seeing, and you mentioned like happening in Venezuela, and kind of that shift towards like more violent means. And I think it even speaks to the fact that one of the things that leads people to kind of have a untrust in the institution is that in the Constitution, it says, any act of war should be authorized by Congress. But when's the last time we've seen that? But people see these countless times where the United States military is actively going in different parts of the world. And so that's where I think people are kind of questioning, are the rules actually going to be followed or not? And I think, we mentioned it too, the immense budget that we have for the military in the United States of America. I think people see that, but they say, I can't even afford dinner for myself and my family tonight. So, where are the priorities lying? And so I feel like, those are kind of some just major underlying problems that we've seen that kind of threads through a lot of the stuff we talked about. But
I also think there's a huge lack of accountability for especially police officers. When they break the law, when they do something wrong, violate the rules, they aren't held accountable for it. Even for things as little as like speeding tickets. If you're in law enforcement, my father is technically a law enforcement officer because he has like certain security clearances. If he gets pulled over for speeding, they let him go. And
That's crazy.
Because they like are gonna give him a ticket. They pull up his driver's license. They see his clearance and they go, "Have a nice day, sir. You're good to go." And he hates it. He wants to get a ticket for speeding because he's breaking the law. And yet we see this huge lack of accountability when rules are violated. And speeding is just like a tiny example of that for like way huger issues.
Yeah, I agree. I think that kind of brings to mind for me protesting and some of the acts of violence we've seen against protesters and how that impacts people's confidence in democracy. Because if I feel passionately about something and I feel upset and angry about something that's going on in my country, I sure as hell better have the right to go out in the streets and talk about it without being like shot at with rubber bullets and tear gas. Like, it's ridiculous. And again, not all military personnel are involved with it, but I think as we've seen in the last couple of years, we have a lot of people who are involved with it, and it's very disturbing to see it happening all around us.
Yeah. Well, even, like just this week, Senator Kelly
here
in Arizona, Senator Slotkin, DeLuzio, and everybody who was part of that video talking about something that's just first week, basic training. We don't follow unlawful orders because the Nuremberg trials, like we just see the outcome of that. Like, that's not an excuse. And they've gotten thousands of death threats, bomb threats to their offices, their homes, like in the last 2 days or so.
It's so scary. And I saw an Arizona Daily Star article about that too, about how they had posted the video, and then this was just like on Instagram, but someone in the comment section was like, "They're inciting an uprising. Like, this isn't okay." I'm like, what? Like, we have lost the plot. We have lost it completely. This is so
like January
insane.
6th? Was that like
right?
that?
Like, no.
And they were like calling for their hangings. I was like, what is this, the Middle Ages?
I know. It's so terrifying and scary.
Yeah. So their speech, right? Like, they're trying to restrict their speech with intimidation, and it's like the whole cult situation.
And
there, but
seriously, and like you said, you mentioned this earlier. All that they were saying in the video is are facts. Like, this is what you mentioned. Like, this is what people learn in their first week of basic training. And I feel like part of the danger that we see in democracy is that we've had this shift from objective facts being true to now everything is subjective. Everything is open to interpretation, and that is just not the case. Sure, there are things that are subjective and open to interpretation, but when you sign up to be in the military, this is the oath that you take. Like, it's very serious. So to just say that again and remind people, like, hey, this is the oath that you took, that's nowhere near inciting an uprising.
No, it's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Because, and I think that's what they're looking for too. Is
Yeah.
for somebody to do that. And, they wouldn't be so upset about it if they didn't want it to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it goes so much towards like the detriment of like, I feel like a lot of the work that, a number of us do and just like on the ground is just like trying to always just get more people civically engaged in whatever way. But then you have people seeing that United States senators, who are just posting a video saying lawful things, saying correct things, are being attacked by the president of the United States. Or you saw, it was probably maybe a few months ago now, but the senator from California, when he tried to ask a question, to I think the Secretary of Homeland Security, and then he was tackled to the ground for asking a question. And like these countless times where, sometimes it's like, how can we expect people to be engaged and civically engaged and involved in government when they're seeing these, powerful people feeling the force of, kind of an authoritarian government.
That's
it's
a great
hard
point, Mikah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it is really scary. And, it is hard. I think that we're all hostages to just this small chunk of the population, right?
Yeah.
The billionaires, the people who are just blind to everything else, or looking for a quick paycheck and just kind of really sold out, or maybe they're in desperate situations, I don't know, but nothing's like, I need a paycheck but I'm not for sale, right? But with that being said, I think it's a small group, and I still believe in the American people. I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, the responses we've seen from No Kings,
Yeah.
The generals during that like big, really dumb, that meeting with the generals where they, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, called them all to sit in his briefing where he like yelled at them and told them they couldn't be fat. But nobody said anything, like crickets.
Right.
Crickets for the president, crickets for him. And that was a protest.
Yeah.
Okay. Like super clear. The sloppy demonstration at the 250th Army birthday parade.
Where nobody showed up.
Nobody showed up, first of all. More people showed up today, I think, at the veterans demonstration at the Remove the Regime demonstration at the Lincoln Memorial today.
That's
I think
wonderful.
it like looks like it filled the National Mall, but gosh, where is it going? Yeah, so it's
Yeah. The hope is there.
The hope is there, and I think I do believe people want to help, they just don't know how. Right?
Yeah.
So you just need to take somebody and be like, come on, let's go.
Yeah.
I think we just got to stick to our ethics and our, founding democracy and human rights. I think that, Mikah, you mentioned the budget. Like, we spend double from China, and it's like, why? What is the reason? Like, what are we defending ourselves from when there's really like no national threat currently? And we have a lot more pressing issues, like a great homeless population that states, and on a national level we cannot even provide basic housing and food for them. So I think our priorities really need to be reshifted in terms of how we allocate the budget and how we treat our citizens. And I think that, as a country, we've always maintained this sort of domination, this aggressive stance militarily, being the number one country in the world, with military defense and just, even internationally, domestically. And I think that it's a problem sometimes because we're seen, not as friendly, not as even to our citizens, like, that you can go up to, military officers on the streets and, feel safe. There's always this fear and threat.
Yeah. Yeah. Gentlemen, I have one more final closing question for you.
Okay.
Just to kind of wrap us up on a positive note. In your experience in the military, what are some ways now that folks can get involved with supporting their veterans locally, and in kind of this continued struggle to strengthen our democracy?
Gosh, that's a great question. You know, there are family groups like locally, you know, for the National Guard, there's family support groups in like every region. And so sometimes, I mean, like just donations to those things, like, you know, whether it's like coffee or donuts, things like that are really helpful. You know, a lot of businesses do discounts, which are really nice, especially in this economy, because, you know, most of the military is like made of junior enlisted and, you know, like times are tough. And so those things are really helpful. Organizations like supporting organizations like Common Defense, like Vote Vets, like Vets Forward here in Arizona. Let's see what else. Yeah, there's just so many. And your local VA. So just, you know, giving them good vibes over there.
Thank you. Well, we really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to talk to you guys.
We've seen today that the grievances listed in the Declaration of Independence are not just a random list of complaints. They reflect deeper concerns about representation, justice, and the abuse of power. As we continue to face suppression, exclusion, and unequal representation, the promise of our social contract still calls us forward. As we continue to face suppression, exclusion, and unequal representation, the promise of our social contract still calls us forward. The fight for a government that truly represents all of us is not finished. It is the very work of democracy. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for a great conversation today, and we thank you for listening and joining us for episode 6 of our Social Contracts in Action podcast, Breaking Away from Military Domination, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Arizona. We hope today's discussion gave you new insights into the Declaration of Independence and the way its principles still echo in our civic life.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this podcast series. We hope to see you again for future installments.